Well, it's about time to do another video, and today I'm going over to a friend's house. I don't think he's actually going to be there, but I'm going to be finishing up some very large oak logs that have been sitting for a while, and unfortunately I think I'm going to have to pretty much do them myself. So I figured I might take some pictures and maybe do a voiceover as I'm doing it, and then do the voiceover afterwards. But these are probably some of the biggest rounds that I've ever worked with, and I'll have to cut them up first and then split them and go through the whole process. They're on the ground, which makes it a little bit more difficult because they're kind of embedded into the ground, so I've got a way to deal with that, and I'll show you how I do that. So it is a beautiful day, probably in the 70s, sunny, and we'll see how it goes. I'm not sure how much I'll get done, but looking forward to giving it a try anyway. So this is what I'm going to be tackling today, or at least some of it. And this is the real big boy over here. Red oak. I've processed some of it previously, but just give you an idea of the size of this. So we're about 31 inches here, and on this other, the stump side, yikes, this bad boy is 42 inches. And the length, they have wood calculators. I'll be able to calculate the approximate, call it 8 feet. Be able to calculate the approximate weight of this log. But needless to say, it's massive. Alright, so this is the log that I tackled first. It's the largest log that's was in one piece, and I did some calculations on this log, and believe it or not, it weighed about 3,600 pounds. I checked it out on 3 different online calculators, and they came within about 100 pounds of each other, so I'm pretty confident that that is the correct weight of this log. Again, it's red oak, and it's quite green, even though it's been sitting on the ground for a little while. The moisture just stays in until you split it up. So where do you start with something this large? Well, first of all, you got to get it up off the ground in some way, because you don't want to embed your chain into the ground, and that would dull it and basically ruin the day unless you had a backup chain or chainsaw, which I did have a backup chain, but I did not need to use it. So what I do sometimes in this case is I use a simple jack to jack up a part of the log to get it up off the ground, and basically you dig underneath it, and you can lift up a pretty heavy log. I think this is a 3 or 4 ton jack that I use to get it up off the ground so that I could start to make my cuts. The first cut had already been started previously. I may have done that a while back. I honestly don't remember, but it was actually a larger section that I normally would do. I would normally do a 16-inch section. This one was about 22 inches. The log, being as large as it is, and me using a 24-inch bar, obviously you need to work your way around the cut, because the bar is not going to make it through a log that is anywhere from 32 inches to 41 inches in diameter with a 24-inch bar. So you work your way around, try to do as straight of a cut as you possibly can, so that you don't run into problems with the cut not coming together on the other end. What I use to, once I get part through the cut, I usually put a filling wedge up at the top of it. I actually forgot my filling wedge in this case, so I had to use a steel wedge. In this case, it did work, but wasn't ideal. It kind of opens up the crack a little bit and allows you to make a full cut. So after I got through 3 cuts, this is what I ended up with. One of the chunks is 22 inches approximately long. The other 2 are 16 inches. And they don't look all that big, but believe it or not, a 16-inch cut of this particular log itself weighs about 600 pounds, each one of those 16-inch sections. So you're dealing with a lot of weight. After I was able to get 3 sections cut, I was able to roll the log, which is another way to deal with avoiding the dirt at the bottom. So you can see now the dirt after I rolled it is near the top. And what I generally do in that case is I try to remove the dirt by removing the bark under the dirt. So in this case I used my 6-pound maul and was able to pretty easily remove that bark, and the dirt came off, and it looked like this when I was done, and it didn't take all that long to do it. It had been sitting on the ground for a little while, so the bark was somewhat loose and able to be fairly easily removed. Once I finished all the cuts, this is what I came up with. I had 6 different sections now that I needed to start to think about processing further and starting to split them up. Now, like I said, each one of these sections weighs, well, the 16 inches weighs 600 pounds, the 22 incher weighs, I didn't do the exact calculation, but it's probably closer to 800 pounds. So that you're still dealing with sections that are pretty hard to move around. So they needed to be processed further. What you want to do in that case is you want to look for some natural cracking that you might find in the round, and in this case it did have a nice natural crack, and so I located that and started to embed a steel wedge. I use a 8-pound maul to embed the wedge. A friend of mine gave that to me recently and seems to work pretty well. You don't need to really hit the wedge all that hard. In fact, sometimes that bounces it out, but if you just kind of tap it with a good, moderately aggressive tap, it will usually embed. Sometimes you might have to move the wedge around a little bit if it seems to be on top of a knot or something. But eventually you can embed it. Sometimes you need to use more than one wedge to make the split complete. In this case, I did need to do that, so I used 2 wedges. And eventually it will split, and you'll have now 2 sections of the log. That still left, in this case, a really large section that still was too big to move around. So what you can do in that case is you can essentially create your own crack in the wood by scoring it with your chainsaw. So you want to find basically the core of the log, and then just take a score from the core out to the edge, and you can do that with your chainsaw by cutting in maybe an inch, inch and a half, and then using your wedges along that particular score that you just created, and you're usually able to split it further from there. So basically each of these rounds I was able to split into 3 different sections. This was the last round that I needed to split, and I actually needed to use 4 splitting wedges because it was just so large, and I effectively was able to use those 4, and then you can see the the score mark that I put in to do the last sectioning of this particular round. This is what I ended up with once I was done. Instead of having 6 rounds, I now had 18 sections of wood that were more manageable to move around. Each one of those sections probably weighed anywhere from 150 pounds up to maybe 250 pounds or a little bit more. So you could fairly easily, roll those around, put them up on the log lifter of my splitter, and it was able to lift them up fairly easily. Actually, very easily, without any difficulty at all. That section was probably one of the larger sections because it was the 22-inch long section, and so that probably weighed close to 300 pounds that I was able to get up without much difficulty. You want to make sure that your splitter is level, because the main danger of lifting up something this heavy is you might tip the log splitter, and you really don't want to do that for obvious reasons. You're not going to have any difficulty with this particular splitter with the strength of the hydraulics. It's more about the keeping it balanced and preventing it from tipping. So I was able to make sure that it did not tip. You can put your foot on one of the wheels if you need to help prevent it from tipping as well. That wasn't necessary in this case, but you just want to be aware of that, because you do not want to tip your splitter over on its side. So basically for the next, I don't know, maybe hour and a half, I worked on each of these sections and just started splitting away and making them into nice sticks of firewood. So in summary, what I was able to do was take this 3,600 pound section of log, and make it into this, which is some nice firewood that will be basically seasoning for the next, I would say, probably 15 months or so. It's now August, and I will use this wood or sell this wood for use in the following winter, not this coming winter, but the winter after that. So you probably get 15, 16 months for the wood to dry out. Most of it did not have any bark on it, and that helps it dry quicker. So I hope this has been informative for you. I realize that my way of doing it is quite labor intensive. I don't like to have a lot of machinery and overhead with my little operation, and I actually enjoy the physical work of it. Not everybody would be so inclined, but I do try to utilize the tools that I do have, and I have more than I have had in the past, so I am able to do a little bit more processing than I could have in the past. But there are other ways to do this in probably a quicker manner, but it would require more machinery. But as long as you use the tools that you have, use your head, think about it methodically, and put together a process, be safe, and you can have some enjoyment processing your firewood, even when you're dealing with huge logs, as I was in this particular case. So I hope you enjoyed it, and God bless.